So at this time, it's my honor to present the microphone and introduce you to Marcella Laborde.
Thank you, Leonard. Čete vašte na večeru zadní. Takoja vyklutí vaštemi umarčáky. In translation, I shake your hand with a good heart. In my Lakota name is Pretty Rainbow Woman, given to me by my grandmother. My grandmother wanted me to carry her name, so she gave that to me as a child. My mother was Florence Borger Bryan of the Two Kettle Band on Cheyenne River Reservation. She was married to my dad, who was Joseph Bryan. He was Irish from Jefferson, South Dakota. My great-grandfather was Forbear, Joseph Forbear, who was known as the Chief Joseph Forbear. He signed the Fort Laramie Treaty of 1868, and we say signed, however, they just put their mark on the treaty. And his name appears on page 10 of the Fort Laramie Treaty. My grandmother was from Standing Rock, from the Hunkpapa tribe. And I knew that as a child growing up. However, we could never find any information on her, and we would write to Standing Rock. Time and time again, my sister Johanna and I, we could never find out anything. There was always no records. So finally, when we were adults, we went to our own agency at Eagle Butte and found that her records were there. And somehow she had been enrolled on Cheyenne River, although we knew as children that she was not from Cheyenne River. Then my mother passed away when I was 10 years old. She left 5 children with my dad. It was my oldest brother Gene, myself, my sister Johanna, my brother Mike, and my little brother Leo. And Leo was sick as a child, as a baby. He developed pneumonia, and he was really sick. Back then, we didn't go to hospitals, but a neighbor lady came by and helped, gave instructions what to do. I remember my parents walking with him at night with a high fever. They put him in cold towels and walked with him. He was so sick. He did survive, and at that time they used to say, if you live 9 days with pneumonia, they would survive. And so he did, but he was weak. So when my mother passed away, he was 4 years old, and my dad had the 5 of us to care for. And all along the river, the Morrow River, which they called, my grandparents called the All River, Hihamakwa. All along the river there were grandmothers who wanted to take us, one here, one there, and there were 5 of us. But my dad didn't want that to happen. He wanted us to keep us all together, and so he kept us together, although we had to go to the boarding school. We lived along the river, the Morrow River, and the whole outdoors was our playground. We had a wonderful, happy childhood there. We had horses, we played along the river, we swam in the river, we fished, we had little trails there, we played hockey, we went to the woods, we got sticks that were shaped like a hockey stick. We'd make the ball out of cloth, we'd roll it up and make a ball, or we'd use a tin can and we'd play our game of hockey. And my dad would say, you kids are going to kill yourselves, because we got kind of rough, I guess. But anyway, we had lots of fun as children. My brother showed us how to shoot the .22 gun, and target shoot. One of my brothers showed us how to box. And so we were active. We did a lot of things together, and we were competitive. When school would be out in the spring, we would race to see who could be the fastest. And when school was out, by then the river usually flooded every spring. By then the water would have receded. We'd go along the riverbank with a barrel that had the top out and the bottom out, and find a spring. We'd put the wooden barrel over the spring and cover it with a wooden cover. And that was our drinking water for the summer. And back then we used to drink out of a pail. And we had a dipper in that pail. And we never got sick. I don't remember, except my little brother when he was a baby. But we never got sick. We had lots of fish to eat. My dad, he had a line from one end of the river to the other bank. And we had drop lines from that. So we would go down and gather our fish. We had a lot of fish to eat. We had chickens, we had cows, my dad had a big garden. We had plenty of vegetables and fruits. My dad was really a hard worker, and he took good care of us. And we all learned to cook and help each other. And I was kind of the kind of mother figure. And I did the cooking, and my big brother Gene, he would help. He would make big cookies and put raisins in there. And raisins and everything, raisins and rice and an oatmeal. And I said, he probably put raisins in soup and we didn't know it. But anyway, we had a real happy childhood. And I look back on that and think how wonderful that was that we had. I was 10 years old. But I had that time with my mother, the time that I had with my dad. And then when my mother passed away, I spent a lot of time with my grandmother. And she couldn't speak English. So naturally, we spoke Lakota as a child. I helped my grandmother. She would pound cherries and make cherry patties, and I would be the one who would crawl up on the roof and lay them out and cover them with cheesecloth, and so they would dry. When she would dry meat, she would cut it up, and I would help her get the cherry branches and spread them out and hang them over a line. We'd make a smudge underneath the line to keep the insects from getting at the meat. So we did a lot of things that way, and I really learned a lot from my grandmother. She made hominy. And one time I went with her along the riverbank, and we looked for moss beans. And you never hardly hear of moss beans anymore. And I can remember that taste, a very distinctive taste, and I haven't tasted that since. And I don't know if people even look for moss beans anymore. I don't know that. But I wanted to give you a little background of how we grew up as children. We rode horses, sometimes with a saddle, sometimes bareback. One time a horse ran away with my sister. She hung on to the mane and didn't get thrown off. And later, much later, we went to St. Elizabeth's School, but I'll get to that later. But I just wanted to say that my dad took our horses up there so that the other kids could get a chance to ride. And there was one horse that was kind of spooky, kind of tricky, but we knew that horse. It was a buckskin with black mane and tail. And in fact, my brother Mike, he named the horse after some cookies that I made. I made some sugar cookies, and I burned the edges black. So he named the buckskin horse with a black mane and tail, he named it Cookie, after my burnt cookies. Anyway, we had lots of fun as children, and we got along well together. And I treasure that time that we spent there growing up. And then after my mother passed away, I spent time with my grandmother, like I said, and she couldn't speak English. So I spoke Lakota as a child. Then along the way, I went to the boarding school. We all did. And to me, looking back on that, that was psychological trauma. Some of the girls were beaten, they were whipped because they spoke their Lakota language. Unfortunately for myself, I could speak both, so I never did get whipped, but I did get punished. And there was a time when I ran away from the boarding school. And what does a 11-year-old child know about running away? But I went with 2 other girls, and I can't even remember that we prepared. I think we might have taken some food from our meal along, I don't remember. But we ran away. And I think I know for sure we spent a night out somewhere. And they caught us the next day. And I was glad for that because my dad was one who always said, mind your teachers, do what they say. So I was glad that they caught us because I was going against what my father had told us to do. They didn't whip us that time, but usually they did. And then my brother, he ran away from the Pure Indian School. I can't remember exactly what happened to him, but there was no way that he would go back to that school. And that had to be like 91 miles away or more. And my uncle hid him out. He hid him out for a long time. He just wouldn't go back. So finally, he said if they didn't whip him, he would go back. But my brother was so smart, and they passed him 2 grades at a time. So when he graduated from the school, he was 16 years old, and he was too young to go to college. And back then, few of us went to college. But he went to Brookings. My dad took him. When we got there to Brookings, he didn't want to get out of the car because we never went off the reservation. I don't remember that we did. So my dad had to talk to him into staying. So he did. And he got his degree. And he said, I never saw an Indian until I looked in the mirror. And he said, I don't know how I made it, but he did. Then I went to nurses training. But let me go back to the boarding school. The boarding school is a place like a military school. They taught us to march. It was like a military. They rang the bell. We got in line. They rang the bell for meals. They rang the bell for everything. We lined up for everything. Go to school for meals. It was traumatic there, looking back on it. Many of the girls were punished. There was one boy that he was sick and apparently didn't do his duty, so they put him over the foot of an iron bed and whipped him. And he was sick. He had appendicitis and he died from ruptured appendicitis. And he was the brother of my dear friend. She was a lifelong friend who should have done with here now. But she won't go back to the reservation because of what happened. So there are many things that I could tell you about the boarding school, but I just wanted to touch on that. And there was a time when I belonged to the North American Indian Women's Association, and we were organized in 1970 in Boulder, Colorado. And our organization still exists today. But back in about I don't recall the year now, but we were invited to Flandreau, South Dakota to have our annual national conference. One of the ladies began crying, And she said, I don't want to go there because my brother passed away there. So one of the other ladies said, this is an opportunity for us, let's take up the challenge and talk about the boarding school traumas. So I thought that was a good idea. So I offered to write a prayer. So I went to my kitchen table with a pad and a pencil. I sat down at that table to write. And as I recalled the things that had happened to us at the boarding school, my feelings, the tears came. I couldn't stop. The tears just flowed. But I wrote my prayer. We went to the conference in Vancouver, and I said my prayer. And I wanted to bring it today to read it here, and I couldn't find it. We went back to look, but we couldn't find it. But anyway, it was one of the things that I said in there was that we need to forgive the things that happened to us and kind of like move on. And I like to think that sometimes I think I'm a victim, but I like to think that I'm a survivor of that boarding school trauma. But I'm sure that it affected our children and their grandchildren. One of the worst things that happened to us, they wouldn't let us speak our language. And our culture is connected with our language. And so one of the greatest disservices I did to my own children was not to teach them the Lakota that I knew. And I feel badly for that happened that way. But I wasn't the only one. There were many, many others who did. And just think what that has done to us. And then beyond that, one of the other things that was, well, we went to school 4 hours a day, and we worked 4 hours a day. There were no child labor laws then. And I worked in the laundry. We mangled sheets, pillowcases, and I ironed. But what did I know about ironing at age 11? So they brought the ironing back to me and said I should iron the ruffles on there too. But they didn't give us instructions. And I worked in the sewing room, and we made sheets and pillowcases. And when my mother passed away, my dad gave me her sewing machine. He said, if you learn to sew, I will buy you all the fabric that you need or want. So I learned to sew. I put newspapers on the floor, and I cut out pajamas. And I learned to sew for my brothers and sisters. And I made a dress for a neighbor lady that came one day and sent her home with a new dress. But today, as I look back, I laugh at that because I made bias tape around the collar, bias tape around the sleeves, and bias tape around the hem. And I don't think anyone got that anymore today. But I was a child. Anyway, so at the boarding school then, I worked in the sewing room, and I made sheets and pillowcases. And I was able to put out more sheets and pillowcases than even the seniors because of my having learned to sew at home. But I never once got a thank you or anyone ever said, that you did a good job. Never. Another thing that happened to me there that I have never told my family growing up as they were growing up. And I have told it recently now. I told it at the tribal council one time and one other time. But I was afraid to tell it. We were standing in line waiting to go for breakfast. And right behind me was the steam radiator, and that blew. And it blew on my backside. And I was burned severely. And it was painful. I wanted to cry. But the bell rang, and we had to move. So I moved, we went, I was okay. But I had that burn, but I didn't trust anybody. I wouldn't tell anyone. So I took care of that burn myself as a child with soap and water, clean cloth. So the boarding school, although there were good times there, I can't say that because we did have fun and we laughed and we, among ourselves, we had our own little group. There was one time when one of my friends, she smoked. I don't know where she got her cigarettes, but she was my friend. And she wanted me to go with her, and they were all sneaking under the porch. So we all went under the porch, and she got out her cigarettes, and she gave me one to smoke, or gave me a puff. And I choked and coughed and put on such a fit. And you're supposed to be quiet if you're sneaking, so they never did ask me again. And I really think that had an impact on my whole life because I don't smoke. And maybe that was a good thing that happened to me that way. So I could tell you a whole lot of other things that happened at the boarding school, but we'll move on to something else. I have so much to tell. I don't know where to keep on going and starting. After the boarding school then, one other thing I wanted to mention about the boarding schools, we went to school 4 hours a day, worked 4 hours a day. So we had half-day education that we really were entitled to. So I would say by the time you had 8 years of education, you had the equivalent of a 4th grade education. And we were supposed to be dumb, stupid, not able to learn. And that message alone to a nation of kids, I think, is devastating. But on the other hand, I had my dad who said, get a good education. No one can take that away from you. So we had that going for us. We had someone who believed in us. We used to tell my dad, we aren't getting a good education here at the boarding school. So finally, after telling him that a number of times, he'd say, well, I don't understand, you're going to school. But there were times when the teacher would come in, give an assignment, and we wouldn't see him till after the class was over with. And the boys would get out their spitwads and their paper airplanes and shoot at us, and the girls, we would get out we had made cards out of composition paper, and they got kind of fuzzy after a while, but we'd get out our fuzzy playing cards and play cards. So that's the kind of education we got there. So my dad took us up to St. Elizabeth Mission School, and that's where we finished our high school. And as a senior, I was taking classes with the freshmen in order to get enough credits to graduate from high school. So after that, then I went to nurse training at St. Mary's School of Nursing in Pierre. And from there, I met Paul Callum. He happened to be a friend of my mother's, he told me. And so he offered my friend Marie Weaver and I a job down at Fort Thompson as nurses. So we went to work down there, and we hadn't received our registered nurse certificate yet, but they accepted us that way. So while we were there, there was a young doctor, and he used to say to us, my friend Marie and I, you girls are young, you're educated, why don't you go out and see the world? So we listened to that for a while. And then while we were there, we received notice that we passed our South Dakota Board of Nursing registered nurse. So we became registered nurses with a certificate. We decided then we would go find another job. So we found a job up in Pontiac, Michigan at $140 a month with board and room. And that was real good money back then. So when we got up there again, we would hear on the radio every day a call for nurses into the military. They needed nurses. So we listened to that for a while, and then we decided that we would sign up for the military. So we joined the Red Cross, and that was our way of getting into the service. And Marie was my friend from nursing. She had red hair, and she had a beautiful singing voice. And so on her application, there was a place where she could put my name down, and I could put her name down, and we could go together to join the military. So when the papers came, she went to Denver, Colorado, in the Pacific, and I went to Palm Springs, California, in the Atlantic. And we never saw each other until after the war. So after you're there, there's not much you can do about the mistake that was made. But my friend Marie, she went to the Philippines and all in that area. She was awarded the Bronze Star, and she had a very honorable service over in that area. And I went the other way. I went to the Atlantic. That was one of the greatest honors and privileges of my life. I went to Palm Springs, California as my first duty station. I worked in the psychiatric wards. I could write a book on everything I experienced there that short time in the psychiatric wards. We took care of soldiers, mostly from the desert, who couldn't tolerate the heat. They had to march, I guess, in the desert. And in Palm Springs, the temperature got up to 117 sometimes. And out in the desert, I guess it was like 130 some. So anyway, I had a wonderful experience there taking care of psychiatric patients. From there, we got a call to go overseas, and we were to meet in Boston, Massachusetts. We boarded a troop train across the United States. And at that time, my sister Johanna was 2 years younger than myself. She was going through nurses training in Jackson Park Hospital in Chicago, Illinois, under the Cadet Nurse Corps. So since that time, they have a rule that the Cadet Nurse Corps is part of the Army, but at that time it wasn't. So it was 5 o'clock in the morning, and I got to a phone when we landed in Chicago. And my sister Johanna was able to come down for half an hour between trains. So I got to see my sister before I went overseas. We went on to Boston, Massachusetts, and there we boarded the USS George Washington, which was a 5,000 troop ship. And it took us about 13 or 14 days to cross the Atlantic Ocean. We landed at Liverpool, England, and from Liverpool we went to Llandudno, Wales, and they tried to make us march up there. We were just picketed in private homes. They tried to make us march there, and that was a fiasco. Most of the nurses had never marched in their lives, but I knew how to march, so it wasn't a problem for me. But anyway, they gave up on that. They decided that they'd let the soldiers do the marching. So we stayed there for a while, and then we went to Llandudno, Wales. We went to Leominster, England, from Llandudno, Wales. Over there, they say Leominster, and we, of course, spelled Leominster, so that's how we said it. But eventually, we got to saying Leominster, too. We were set up in a barracks-type hospital there in Leominster, England. And one morning, we got our call, 2:30 in the morning, to report to our duty station. And that was after D-Day. D-Day was June 6, 1944, and we began getting casualties from D-Day. So we took care of the casualties from D-Day. They had been treated along the way before they came to Leominster, England, to our hospital. So that was June 4th, 1944. And then about the middle of August, about the 16th of August, when it was safe, we too crossed the channel and we landed at Omaha Beach. We were on a Dutch ship across the English Channel. But before that, Guy Lombardo came, and he had a concert out on cow pasture, and we were privileged to go to that. And the next day, I guess he came missing. His plane was missing, and I don't think they've ever found anything. It's never been located, never found again. But we left from Southampton. We crossed the English Channel. It took us about 3 days because of the weather. We landed at Utah Beach. We had to climb down a rope ladder into a landing barge. And they took us ashore that way. And they let the front down of the landing barge. And some of them got wet because they let the landing barge down too soon. But fortunately for myself, they let the landing barge down on the ground, so we didn't have to wade through water. And then we camped in a cow pasture there at Carrollton, near Omaha Beach. But along the way, I had a toothache. I don't know what happened, but I had a toothache. So I went to the dentist on board, and he said, "Your teeth are perfect. There's nothing wrong with them." So they thought that I was making off so that I wouldn't have to cross the English Channel. So when we landed at Omaha, at Utah Beach, the pain had localized to my front tooth. So then they knew that I did, in fact, have an infection in my front tooth. I apparently had bumped it somewhere along the way. So in the cow pasture, they took me to a dental clinic, and they were set up, and they took care of my tooth there, just like over here, they were set up for dental clinic. We were there in the cow pasture for, I don't know how long it was. While we were there, we got to go and see Mount St. Michel. We visited there, and that's a place where if you go at a certain time, and the tide is out, you can get there, but when the tide comes in, you're stranded there. You can't, there's no way to get out of there. So we were fortunate that we could go and get out of there when we did. We stayed there, and then finally they took us by by truck up to Paris, France. We went through Saint-Lô, and we saw all the rubble there that had been from the war. At the beach, we saw the I can't even think of them now, but they were knocked out anyway. There were tanks that were there that couldn't run. We saw all that damage. And we were told not to walk because of landmines. It's been so long since I've talked about this. So we had to be careful where we walked because of landmines. They took us up to Paris, France then from there, and we were temporarily assigned to a hospital in Paris, France. It was the 108th General Hospital the Americans had, but prior to that, it was the Hospital Boujan. It was a French hospital. But the Germans had taken it over, and were there before the Americans Liberated Parish grants. There was one night that we were allowed to go down into Paris, and we had dinner down there, and we saw one of the shows there. That was the only night that we were allowed to go down into Paris. Then from there, they took us to Liège, Belgium. Just a minute. They took us to Liège, Belgium, and they had a 1,000-bed tent hospital set up there for us. I was a surgical nurse, and mine was the first ward on the compound. It was A number 1. I was located right near the surgery, and the doctors refused to work in a tent surgery, so they built a wooden surgery for them. We sent our surgical patients to and from surgery, and we were busy night and day. We kept some just overnight, some stayed longer. There was constant turnover. We had about 300 prisoners of war that worked on the whole hospital. We had one that helped transport our patients to and from the surgery. I had 2 corpsmen. One was Willie, who was a sergeant, and one was Coffee. He was a private. And then there was one nurse that was assigned to my ward. So I had a helper. We had 4 surgical wards, and one was like a shock ward. We took turns working our nights 30, I think it was 30 days. We took turns working nights, sometimes on my own ward. And when I took my other turn, I would be at the shock ward. It was there in Liège, Belgium, when the Battle of the Bulge happened. The Battle of the Bulge started about the 15th, 16th of December. We were told to, if we had any Christmas presents, to go ahead and open them, and to be packed and ready to be evacuated on a moment's notice. We didn't know what war was going on around us. We only heard what was told to us, but we were busy all the time. We didn't know about the Battle of the Bulge till way after the war. And we could, they dropped flares sometimes to light up the night sky just like day. And we were told that they were looking for troop movements. We could hear the tanks going down the cobblestone streets, hour after hour. We could hear the planes overhead. We could feel the ack-ack on the ground. The concussion was so strong. One time my girlfriend, she lost her balance and fell with, we had little thermometers and a little tray. She fell with those and rescued her thermometers. None of them broke, so she was pretty proud of that. Another time I knocked off my medicine cabinet from the wall. The concussion was so strong. Then we had bus bombs that came over night and day. Christmas Day, 1944, we had a Christmas church service by our chaplain, this Chaplain Butterworth. I went to that Christmas service with my friend Esther. There were 3 of us in our tent, Esther and Betty and I. Esther and I went to this Christmas church service by Chaplain Butterworth. The bus bombs were so loud you couldn't hear anything, but he kept right on praying, just as if there was no noise. when a bus bound would come over, the GIs would hit the ground. And in the chapel, there was just ground, it wasn't floor. But Esther and I, we sat there through the whole thing, we didn't hit the ground. Then on January 8, 1945, a bus bomb hit our hospital. I had worked nights that night, and the military police were getting ready in their area to go to bed. One of them went out to the latrine. The bus bomb hit. 25 of our men were killed. One that went to the latrine was saved. One of the nurses met me as I was going back to my tent to sleep. I had worked nights. She was crying. She said, "Don't go there. It's terrible." But without limbs, she said, arms, legs. "Don't go there." She said, "They need you. You'll get some sleep so they'll need you tonight." So I listened to her. I went to my quarters and got some sleep that night. Sure enough, when I worked on the shock ward that night, we had casualties that survived that. They were the military police. The ones who protected us. The bus bombs came over night and day. One night I went to work on my own ward for night duty. I saw Coffee, my foreman, and he was deathly scared of the bus bombs. He would either go out the front door or ward or the back door. Every time a bus bomb came, they had foxholes dug for us. He would run out the front door of the back door of our tent and get in a foxhole. This one night I went to work on my own ward. I saw Coffee. I knew that he couldn't go on like that much longer. My gut level feeling was that he couldn't go on. I went to my medicine cabinet and I got a sleeping pill. I took him down to the mess hall. I explained that to him. We had lunch, coffee. He took the sleeping pill. We took him back to the ward and I told Willie, take him back to his tent so he can get some sleep. If it hadn't been for that, I don't think he could have carried on. Because there were some who, as the lay term says, they went berserk. One of them took a butcher knife down in the mess hall to somebody else. He didn't know what he was doing. After the war, I worried about Coffee. I wrote to him. I let him come back. We used to have reunions at Des Moines, Iowa. Our hospital gathered there. I learned that he had passed away, but I never knew how, that his wife was in a nursing home. We had reunions after the war. It was like a healing thing for us. They were able to tell us things that we didn't know when the war was going on. We were there in Liège, Belgium, almost a year to the day, one year, just about the whole year. Toward the end of the war, they fixed it up pretty nice. We had men who had landscape appearance and they made it look really nice. But during the wartime, we didn't have time for that. We were busy. It was a time when penicillin was new, the miracle drug. They had a team that went around and gave penicillin shots. They had to be given every 4 years, every 4 hours around the clock. We had all the supplies we needed. We gave many, many blood transfusions. We're just really busy. And we had all the blood we needed. We never ran out. One time, there was a soldier brought in. They laid him on the cot with legs about that high. Laid him on the floor of my tent. He hollered my name and I hollered his. It was Willie. Willie from Walla, where I went to school. He was in my ward overnight and transferred on. One time, one of my patients was a prisoner of war. You're silent, don't speak. Your eyes are hollow. Your skin is stretched over the bone. That is embedded in my memory. Can't forget. We had patients come in, some with 14 different things wrong with them on their diagnosis. They came into us with a, I guess they called it a field jacket. It was a little attached to them paper, all the things that were wrong. I had a wonderful doctor that I worked with. His name was Major Thompson. He was from near Des Moines, Iowa. He called me Missy. We had a wonderful working relationship. He was a surgeon, and he was in surgery a lot of the time. He'd come and make his rounds on the patients in my ward. When they came in, I would review their information that they had into them, review everything and make comments on their. Major Thompson would come and review them and okay everything. So we had a wonderful working relationship. That was good. We knew that we were appreciated by the doctors. One night, I heard this noise. It was January. It was in January. I heard this noise. I went to the front door of my tent. And there was a plane coming. It was coming over the nurse's area, and it was strafing. I could see the strafing as it came. I stood at the doorway there watching. As it came to my tent, it quit strafing. And I often wondered if it saw the Red Cross on the tents, and that was why they stopped strafing. But shortly after that, my friend Esther, my tent mate, she came. And she said, I don't care if this war lasts 10 years, I'm never taking another bath. She was in the process of taking a bath, and all she had was a towel. And our tent was hit with shrapnel, and she brought the shrapnel with her, and that was what she said. And years later, when we went to a reunion, I told her what she said, and she didn't even remember having said that. I suppose she was in shock. And our chief nurse's tent was hit. And she had 2 cots in her tent because she was the chief nurse. And she rolled under the other cot, and the shrapnel missed her. We had outside latrines. And we had snow. It was wintertime. It was cold. It was after the war was beginning to end. But there was a time when, at night, we looked down over Liège, and we were kind of up on a hillside. And down in Liège, we could see, it looked like the river was on fire. And of course, we never did find out what it really was, but that's what it looked like from where we were. After things were calming down and things were war was letting up, they were sending the nurses to a rest area at Riviera. And so they wanted my friend, my teammate, Betty and I to go. I didn't think that I needed to go, but they said you're ordered to go. So they sent us down there for a week. We took a train down there, and along the way, they had outside faucets set up where the soldiers could wash. And for the women, they had a bathroom. It was open to the sky, but it had gunny sack around the four sides for the wall. It was open to the sky, and they had a helmet in there that you could wash your hands with Lysol in there. So that was the latrine that they had for the nurses on the way. So we went to the Riviera for a week, and we could wear civilian clothes, but we didn't have any. And I happened to have a bathrobe that I cut off and made kind of like into a dress that I could wear down there. And the people down there thought that we were French. And Betty had black hair, and she was beautiful, light skin, and they would speak French to us because they thought we were French. And of course we didn't understand. And all I know was merci beaucoup, and that doesn't get you very far. Anyway, there's much more I could tell you, but I will say that that was one of the greatest honors and privileges of my life. After the war, we had reunions in Des Moines, Iowa. But one of the men who was the administrative officer, it was his duty to find out all of the men who were killed, the 25 men. And he told us then, he said, I couldn't take it, he said I had to go off, and I cried, and I vomited. And there was one that they never identified. So after the war, then one of my daughters and I, we went to Paris, France. We took a train up to Liège, Belgium. And when we got to the information counter, I was looking for a plaque that was left over there to the 25 men who were killed there. So we went to this information counter, and I began telling the man there that we were looking for this plaque, if it had been left there somewhere. When I went to this information counter, there was a man on my right. He came up and he said, "Lady, because of you, we are free. Thank you." And he left. There was a lady sitting there on a little bench. She got up and she offered to take us any place we wanted to go. So she heard what I was looking for. So she said, "We'll go to the Henri Chapelle Cemetery." And she worked at the university there, so she had to call and get permission to leave her job. So she took us first to her home, where she offered us lunch and the use of her bathroom. She showed me the room where her mother had passed away. She had taken care of her She had cancer. So she took us to the Henry Chappell Cemetery. They had a log there, and in that log I found the names of these men. They didn't know anything about the plaque, but most of the men, soldiers, had been repatriated to the United States of America by their next of kin. That was written in the log. Up on the wall, they had the story of the Battle of Bulge. And the man who worked there, he was superintendent, his name was Ferdinand. He said, when you go home, if you will send me pictures, I can see if I can help you. So when I came back, I sent him a picture of the plaque. So from that plaque, he was able to, in the pictures I sent, he was able to identify where we had been, and a transportation company had built up there. And so when they heard the story, they built a semicircular place out in front, and they reconstructed that plaque, and they put it up there in memory of these men. One of the men from our reunion and his family, they went over there and they saw that area that had been set up in memory of these 25 men. He came back to our reunion the next year, and he told us that he could hardly tell. So those reunions that we had were, I think, very helpful to us. My friend Esther and I used to go every year. She would come down from Montana, pick me up in Eagle Butte, and we would go to Des Moines, Iowa. Now my friend Esther, she's in a nursing home. She doesn't remember much, but I write to her, continue to write. I get no response anymore. My other friend, Marie, she lives in St. Paul, Minneapolis, and she writes frequently. They're like my sisters. In 2004, I received word that they were honoring 100 World War II veterans on D-Day Memorial, the 60th anniversary of D-Day. My name was given by Camilla Madden. She used to come to Eagle Butte, and she worked with the veterans on work therapy. And she asked me to serve on her advisory committee. And I was glad to do that. Somewhere she had read of my experience, so she gave my name when she was in Washington. So they contacted me, and I had to present my records. In order to qualify, you had to have been there during a certain time period. And we had taken care of soldiers from 3 campaigns, from the Rhineland, from northern France, and from the Ardennes. And the Ardennes is one and the same as the Battle of Bulge. So I qualified. I met their criteria. So in 2004, I went with my daughter, oldest daughter. They allowed one escort. and her husband went along Bob. So the three of us went. The French people can really put on a celebration. On the plane, they had cloth napkins for us and real silverware. They had printed menus. When we landed over in France, they had a red carpet laid out for us. I was afraid to walk on it. It was so plush, but they pushed us back on the carpet. They gave us gifts everywhere that we went. They had a reception here, reception there. When we went to the hotel, it was beautiful. They had chocolates in there for us. They had flowers, just everything you could imagine. They took us to the courtyard, some huge courtyard, and there's a name for it, but I don't remember. But that they had horses on horseback. I mean, they had people on horseback. And just everything imaginable. And they had chairs set out for us, and they brought medals of honor. I think there were probably 8 or 10 on a board that they brought out. There was a lady that gave me mine. They had dignitaries there, they had music. I can't describe how it all was. Then they took us, early one morning we had to go on a train down to Normandy. And then part of the way we went by bus, and we were color-coded. I think my color was orange. I had to have an orange label on, and then the bus was color labeled orange as well. So we had many places there that we went. First, they had a place set up above Omaha Beach. It was there that President Bush spoke, President Chirac. We could see Colin Powell in the back in that seating. My daughter took pictures, and she had one of those Zoom cameras, and so she could get these pictures that were far away. And when I came home, someone asked me if President Chirac spoke in English. And I said yes, and then I got to thinking, what happened was they gave us earphones, and we could listen in those earphones, and I think this speech was translated into English. And then they took us, well, from there, I was leaving the area when a man came up to me, and he handed me a note. And he said, I don't speak English. So I took the note without saying anything. I didn't even say thank you. And I left. And then I was asking, can we go to Omaha Beach? Anyway, I have to tell a little story before that. Back in South Dakota, my daughter Jerry, that's with me today, through her co-workers, there was a man named Don, and he told her that his father and his best friend were in D-Day, in the invasion. And his father's best friend was wounded. So he called for the medic for him. And he never knew what happened to him after that, till after the war. But after the war, he learned that he lay there for 12 hours before they could get to him. And he had a severe head injury and was sent back to the United States. So Don, he asked if I could get to Omaha Beach, if I could say a silent prayer for his dad and his best friend. And he offered to pay the way for my daughter to go to Paris, France with me, but it was too late to make arrangements. So he paid for her and granddaughter to go to the French embassy in Washington, D.C., so she could be there at the reception. So we were standing up above Omaha Beach waiting. They had us wait there while President Bush took off in his helicopter. Then we were escorted down to Omaha Beach. I had the prayer in my pocket, and I had a little plastic baggie. I collected sand just before the sand got wet, and I stood there and read to myself the prayer. I have to build a little addition to that, but let me read you the prayer that I said silently in Omaha Beach. This is June 6th. O Great Spirit, guide my steps on this path to Omaha Beach. Guide my hands as I collect sand from this hallowed ground. Great Spirit, accept now my prayer for the brave and courageous soldiers who saw the horrors of war here this day, 60 years ago, June 6, 1944. Great Spirit, keep us ever mindful of the great sacrifices made to liberate France and to bring peace to our world by these valiant men. O Great Spirit, now hold my hand and walk with me up the cliff of Omaha Beach, filled with emotion no words can ever express. From there, we went to another place where they had another celebration. They had huge panels where they had pictures showing, and they had a ballet performance, and they were all dressed in black. And I suspect that that probably meant in mourning. I don't know that. But they had several different performances for us. There were dignitaries that pulled up in limousines and got off. There were, I don't know how many people were there, but there were lots and lots of people. And they had the planes fly overhead in their vapor paths or whatever they are, in the red, white, and blue. And down in the ocean they had ships going by in review. They had horseback riders on the beach riding by. I can't begin to tell you, explain everything that happened. There was so much that went on. It was such a great honor to be recognized that way. Here the other day, a week ago or so, on my cell phone, I had my daughter pull up a message. It was from this man who said he was my escort to Omaha Beach. He heard about us having a quilt shop. My granddaughter and I, we called it the Rose Room. He heard about that somehow, so he wanted to order a red, white, and blue quilt, the colors of their flag. And so I told him I would be honored to make him a star quilt in red, white, and blue if he would pay for the shipping. So I have the quilt made now, and it's I'm having it quoted. So as soon as that's done, I'll get it to him. And he said, "Are you planning to come over for the 70th anniversary of D-Day?" June 6th is 2014. I said I hadn't thought about it. My daughter said if you saved your money, you could go. And so that, I guess that's an option. But just imagine, June 6th of 2014 will be 70 years. And on October 12th of this year, I will be 94. So there's a possibility that I could go. I have a map here. I don't imagine you can see it from there. But after the war, we found out that there were 3,000 bombs that landed in Liège, Belgium during the time that we were there. So you can imagine, every few minutes, night and day, that's what we listen to. You know, I was just telling one of the Korean soldiers this morning that back home they have powwows and they have the veterans and they shoot off their guns. And I'm getting to the point where when they shoot them off, I jump. And I'm hearing that World War II veterans are getting reactions from the war. And I don't know if that's what's happening to me, but I'm experiencing that. I was going to ask them if they would not do that. I don't know if they will listen to me. Anyway, my granddaughter and I, well, let's go back to when I worked after the war. I worked at our little hospital in Eagle Butte. And I can say that I really consider that a privilege to work among my own people. I got to know the women, and many of them raised their families in poverty with very little, and yet they did a good job. And I really respected them. There was one time when I worked there that I became the director of nursing, as Leonard said. I was on 24-hour call, and I was called in on a weekend, and with a mother, they were transferring to Mobridge, about 80 some miles away. They said her labor had stopped, and she was expecting her child. So I met them at the back door. They had the patient loaded. We got on this little plane, and at that time, we went across a field, and there was a local plane. You felt like you had to lift up your feet at the other end of the strip. It was a field, because you had to go over a fence, and you just felt like you should lift your feet up to get over that fence. Anyway, we were halfway to Mobridge at about Trail City, when the mother said, "I have a contraction or pain," she said. And then a little bit later, "I'm going to have my baby." I said, "Go ahead, we have everything here." So she had her baby. I cut the cord, wrapped the baby in a blanket, gave her to the sister who was along with us. And the pilot turned up the heat, just like you're supposed to do, I guess, and about roasted us out. So we took the mother on to Mobridge, and the grandmother, she went by car. When she got there, she said, "Well, since the baby was born close to heaven, we should call her Angel." And because Marcella delivered the baby, it should be called Angel Marcella. So I was honored to have a baby named after me. That was a real privilege for me to work at the hospital there in Eagle Butte. The day after I retired, I was ran for tribal council. So I retired one day and was elected the next day to tribal council. So I spent 4 years, one term, on the tribal council. And then as a nurse, I thought one thing that I could do was start a ban on smoking. And we had a lot of people who smoked, and that wasn't very popular. But I would put out information often in their boxes to read. Eventually, it failed several times, and eventually it got passed. And even yet today, people will come up to me and tell me they quit smoking, like they had to report to me. But now, I belong to the Chile Coalition, the Chashasha Coalition, and still work in that field trying to make things better for our children, mostly. So that was, politics are not exactly for me, but when I ran again for re-election, I didn't get elected because one of my opponents used that against me. And I said, I'd rather stick to my convictions than be elected. So that's what happened. So after the war, then, I've been involved in a lot of things. With my granddaughter, we started a quilt shop, the quilting shop, and we called it the Rose Room. And we did a lot. I learned a lot. We had a giveaway for my oldest son, who unfortunately was killed in a car accident. And he danced at the Sundance at Eagle Butte. And while I worked at the hospital, there was Sidney Keith worked there. And he started the first Sundance on our reservation. They call it the International Sundance, which is at Greengrass now. And he handpicked his own committee, and he picked me as one of his committee. And I was honored to help Sidney do that. Although I'm not a Sundancer myself, I support it. And my son, who at that time was he married over in New York, he came back and danced 4 times at the Sundance. And that's when we had the giveaway for him. He had left us in this car accident, but he had told me the ones that he wanted to honor. So we got quotes ready for him, and we had a giveaway after he passed on. I think we had 48 quotes at that time. And I thought, this is something that I could do because I like to sew. That's my passion. So we set up a quilt shop, my granddaughter and I. I'm no longer in that business anymore because of my age. But I'm still sewing, and I wanted to bring some of the quilts that I have made to show you folks and tell you about the one that I'm making for the man over in France. The one in blue I put on at the fair this year, and I got third place in it. Last year I got first place, so I'm moving around. But I still like to sew, and I sew for my children and my grandchildren. There are other things I could tell you about, like Well, one important thing that I didn't tell you was about Eugene Rubidoux. When I was working on the shock ward, one of the nurses asked me if I would go and see a Native American she had on her ward, and his name was Eugene Rubidoux. He had lost both legs above the knee, and she felt that he was depressed, that he was suicidal, that they didn't want to even give him a razor blade to shave with because they thought he was suicidal. So I went to see him, and he was very quiet, which is the way we are. I offered to write letters home for him. He didn't want to do that. I took newspapers from home to him, what I had. I went to visit him as often as I could. One day he was gone. He had been repatriated to the United States. Apparently he was well enough to travel. So when I came home then, and I worked at our little hospital, we went to many meetings as director of nursing. I would always ask, if someone was there from Rosewood, I would ask, do you know Eugene Rubidoux? And always they didn't know him. So this went on for 40 years. One day, a young lady came to our hospital. She was explaining about a new form that we were supposed to convert to. She left. So the next morning I got this call. And she said, "This is Ann Lafferty. Do you know my dad, Eugene Rubidoux?" And I said, "Yes." And then I got all choked up and I couldn't talk. She said, "Are you okay? Are you all right?" Finally, I said, "Yes." She said, "He's my father." And there were two of us. She said he was divorced. He moved to Yankton. He remarried, has a large family. He's doing well. So I got his address and his phone number. And I couldn't call him right away. I had to wait. I waited a few days and then I called. I said, "Do you remember the nurse that stood at your bedside in Liège, Belgium?" He said, "I'll never forget." I told the other veterans at home and the Legion auxiliaries who wanted to honor him. So they helped me. November 11, 1984, we invited him and his wife to Eagle Butte. We honored him there. We had a dinner. We walked to the podium with a native of cane to say thank you. I learned that he was invited many times back to the VA in Fort Snelling. He was a role model, and he talked to many veterans, amputees, to encourage them and help them. And his wife said, "He's a jack of all trades. He does everything. He drives a car." And he did so much. And to me, that was satisfying to me to know that Now, after that, I can't remember how long after he passed away. And that called me. When we always were short-handed at the hospital, I couldn't go, couldn't get away. But a year later, they had a memorial giveaway for him. She invited me again. By then I was retired and I was free to go. So I went to Yankton to his service. There were veterans there, amputees. They had a beautiful memorial service for him and a giveaway. Annette asked me to tell my story, so I did. One of the veterans, an amputee, he came up and he said they gave him a beautiful hand-quilted star quilt. He said, when they sent me this invitation, I didn't know what to do or what to expect, what I should say. I said, you know, your presence here is an honor to them, and that's all you need to do, is to be present. I could tell you so much more. I brought some of my albums. I brought my album, I think it must be 60 years old, of my World War II experience, among other things. In 1995, I went with, not with him, but I went to Glasgow, Scotland, and Mario Gonzalez went with his family. We went to request the return of the sacred ghost dance shirt that was held in Glasgow, Scotland from the time that the Buffalo Bill Wild West show was over there. And there was a man by the name of John Krieger that donated the ghost shirt to the museum. He didn't sell it, he donated it. So that was over there since that time. And I can't remember the year, but there was a young lawyer of Cherokee descent was over there and he saw a traveling exhibit. And at that traveling exhibit, they had this ghost shirt. And when he saw it, he said he knew immediately that it did not belong there, that it belonged to the Lakota people. So Mario was the lawyer for the Wounded Knee Survivors Association at that time. And we had one group on Cheyenne River and one on Pine Ridge. At that time, Mario gave the history of the ghost shirt, Wounded Knee, the history. And I don't think anyone can give the history of Wounded Knee any better than Mario Gonzalez can. So he laid the groundwork for the return of the ghost shirt. But nothing happened at that time because there was a man by the name of Spalding who was adamantly opposed to the return of the ghost shirt. So nothing happened. So in 1998, a group had been working over there in Glasgow and that area, London. They did a lot of work in public awareness and that kind of thing. So in 1998, they said that it was time to go back. So when it came time to go back, the delegate from Pine Ridge wasn't able to go. Riddell Breon wasn't able to go from our tribe. And I was the secretary at that time of the Wounded Knee Survivors Association on Cheyenne River. And then the week before we were to leave, Mario called and said that he could not go. So that left myself. And at that time, my son, Richard, wanted to go with me. And he felt compelled to go. And as we researched our genealogy, we found that on my ex-husband's side, that they were descendants, my family were descendants of Wounded Knee. So Richard and I went together that time, 1998. We went to the hearing. I gave my talk. And there were certain things that you had to provide in order to qualify even to be the one to make the request for the return of the gosher. So I gave my talk at the Borough Building, they called it, and only 100 people could be there. There was a capacity of that building. So they had to draw straws or whatever they did for the ones who could be there. There was Ian Sinclair from the Isle of Lewis. There was John Earl from, at that time he lived in Woodstock, Georgia. And then my son and I, the four of us. As I gave my talk, it was in the newspapers and we were told that there were people sobbing in the audience. After the talk, we had to wait a few days and go before the city council, and they were the ones who made the vote, or took the vote, to decide whether or not they would agree to return the gosher. When they had the hearing, there was one man who spoke for probably 10 or 15 minutes against the return of the gosher. But when they took the vote, it was in favor of the return of the gosher. But it wasn't like you could just pick it up and bring it home, because I guess over there they have rules and regulations. They had to clear through London or whatever they have to do. So we couldn't just bring it home. So Richard and I came home, and it was July 30th of 1999 when they came. The people from the museum wanted to come themselves and bring it. And it was Mark O'Neill, Liz Cameron, John Lynch and his wife came. And we had a program in Eagle Butte Friday evening, and again Saturday, and Sunday we went to the gravesite. And because we don't have any authority on the Pine Ridge Reservation where the mass grave is, we turned that part of the program over to Pine Ridge. And one of the I can't remember his name, but he's sitting right over there. He was there at the gravesite. Or Nathan Lyman. Anyway, while we were at the gravesite, we had turned that part of the program over to Pine Ridge, so they conducted that portion. And I gave a talk there, and I wanted to read that to you folks, but I wasn't able to locate it when I came here today. But while we were there was Alexis Roby from New York that was doing a DVD, And I have that DVD here, and I don't think there's time to show it, but Nathan over there was in that DVD. And a remarkable thing happened. We went to the foot of the hill, and that was where the transfer was made from the people from Glasgow, Scotland. They transferred the ghost shirt over to the Pine Ridge Wounded Knee Survivors Association, or whoever the Wounded Knee Pine Ridge people were. We were walking up the hill when someone spotted an eagle overhead. And Alexis Roby caught that eagle on his DVD. So that was an awesome sight, such a wonderful feeling to know that we had an eagle watching over us. And I gave my little talk there. And one of the things that I said was I wanted to give credit to Mario Gonzalez. He was the leader in all of this. He set the groundwork for all of this to happen. And so I said he was a champion in this effort. So from there we went to Pier. And we had to make arrangements with the museum to keep the ghost shirt, the sacred ghost shirt, for us until such time as Cheyenne River or Pine Ridge had a museum to hold the ghost shirt for us. They wanted it to be in a safe, environment-controlled place. So we agreed to that. And while we were there was a fully beaded vest that belonged to Rain in the Face. And growing up, I knew that I was related to Rain in the Face, my grandmother, on my grandmother's side. But I was a child, and I didn't know how I was related to him. But over the years, I have documentation, and I want to thank LaDonna Allard for all of the information that she sent me from Standing Rock. Because now I know that I have a lot of relatives up there, Madonna included. And so I'm thankful for that. And I presented the issue to my relatives up on Standing Rock, that they could repatriate the beaded vest from Glasgow, Scotland. And I would be willing to help if I could. And so we've had several meetings up there in Standing Rock about that. But things have kind of taken a lull, I guess, or nothing's happening right now, but we need to work on that. I think with all of the suicides and the dysfunction that we have on our reservations, that we need to do these things in order to show our children that we had noble people in our past, and we need to let them know that they have role models to follow and that good can happen for them. And I wanted to say that back on our reservation, we are showing a DVD on the boys' school. It's done by, it's Walter Little Montessori, he's from Pine Ridge, and he also writes a book. They called me Uncivilized. And the DVD is The Thick Dark Fog. And as our women's organization back home, we are showing that in different parts of our reservation, to the junior high, to the seniors, and wherever we can, anyone who will watch it. And there are people on my reservation who do not agree that the boarding schools were traumatic. Because as time went on, boarding schools did get better. But I know the trauma that happened to us, and the fact that we were supposed to be dumb, stupid, and not able to learn. And I think, what did that do to a nation of children? And the things that are happening on our reservation now today, things have to be better. And we have to heal and help ourselves. So there's much left for me to do, and I belong to the Chali Coalition, the Chashasha Coalition. I'm the secretary to the Hawk organization, which on our reservation replaces the Wounded Knee Survivors Association. Every year we give certificates to those who are riding their motorcycles for Wounded Knee. And that's an honorable thing that they're doing for all of us. And the least we can do is give them recognition. So I'm involved in a lot of things in the veterans organizations. Every time I go anywhere and see veterans, I shake hands with them. Because the Vietnam veterans weren't treated very well when they came back here. So the least I can do is shake their hand and say thank you for their service. So thank you for listening. And I do have 2 DVDs here. One is the Eugene Roubidoux story, and the other is The Return of the Ghost Shirt. And I don't know if there will be time to see either one of them, but I'll leave that up to Leonard. Thank you for listening.
We have something to give you, Marcella. It's hard to put together words from the words that you have given us. A bit of history that not too many of us here, many were born long after World War II. And so you are a walking treasure. And with that, we wanted to acknowledge to you in a few days, October 12th, as I've been told, will be your 94th birthday. And so, as a group, we wanted to honor you with an early birthday present of this cake. It says, "Happy Birthday, Marcella." And if you could see that, they've put your whole image, your body, your face on there. And we put the 94 a little bit early. And you could probably take part of it home, especially the part with yours. And you and Julie can share it with your family. But I'm going to ask impromptu, while you're still standing, I'd like to have Lisa here, and LaDonna, and Colleen. I'd like to have you lead us in a birthday song. And then, Lakhotia, all right. You lead us in a happy birthday. We'll get together so you can harmonize.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Marcella. Happy birthday to you.
I'd like to ask Harold Dean to sing her an honoring song.
Better
like to ask you all to come forward to shake her hand, but I'd like to have a lady lead that handshaking. She is a relative of a Oglala lady that I discussed with Marcella. Her name was Florence Agnes Graham Jeffers. And she was a World War II nurse also, and she was stationed in Philippine Islands. So I'd like to have you follow her as we shake your hand for you in honor and appreciation for your life. We'll feel each other.